I'm 26 years old now, but this story starts when I was 18 and first met my dad's friend, Harold. That initial meeting set the tone for what would become years of condescension, insults, and boundary violations that I endured largely in silence until I finally snapped in the most spectacular way possible. I'm 26 years old now, but this story starts when I was 18 and first met my dad's friend Harold. That initial meeting set the tone for what would become years of condescension, insults, and boundary violations that I endured largely in silence until I finally snapped in the most spectacular way possible. Let me paint you a picture of that first encounter. I was a bright-eyed college freshman, excited about my future, studying medicine with dreams of making a difference in the world. When my dad introduced me to Harold at a family gathering, I expected the usual pleasantries, maybe some encouragement about my studies, perhaps some fatherly advice from one of my dad's friends. Instead, the first words out of Harold's mouth were dripping with condescension. "Oh, so you want to save the world. How sweet. Little dumb 18-year-old thinks the world can be saved." I was stunned. Who talks to someone like that upon first meeting them? I looked at my dad, expecting him to defend me, to tell his friend that was an inappropriate way to speak to his daughter. Instead, my dad laughed. Actually laughed. Like Harold had told the funniest joke in the world. When I shot my dad a death stare, the kind that should have communicated exactly how not okay this was, he doubled down. He said that what Harold said was funny. In that moment, I realized my dad wasn't going to have my back. Not with Harold, anyway. From that day forward, every single time I encountered Harold, he made it his personal mission to tear me down. It became a pattern, a ritual of humiliation that I came to dread. He'd critique my outfits, telling me they looked awful. He'd mock the books I read, calling them childish and stupid. Never mind that some of them were complex literary works or required reading for my courses. When he found out about my past playing volleyball, he made it sexual and creepy, suggesting I'd only liked the sport because I could wear the spandex around the boys. The implication was disgusting, and it made my skin crawl. And through all of this, my dad never once stepped in to defend me. Not once. He'd stand there, sometimes laughing along, sometimes just silent, but always complicit. It was like Harold had carte blanche to say whatever he wanted to me, and my father's friendship with him was more important than my daughter's dignity. The absolute final straw, or what I thought was the final straw at the time, came during a family barbecue. I was at the grill, cooking for everyone, when Harold walked up and announced loudly, "That's not how you cook. Let a real man show you." Before I could even respond, he physically pushed me out of the way and took over the grill. I was 20 years old at the time, and I remember standing there, displaced from the task I'd been handling perfectly fine, watching this man, who'd done nothing but belittle me, now literally push me aside. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. This was what Harold had been doing metaphorically since we met, and now he was doing it literally. That was my breaking point. After the barbecue incident, I made a conscious, deliberate effort to avoid Harold, and I was remarkably successful at it for 6 entire years. I'd ask my dad in advance who would be at family gatherings. If Harold was on the guest list, I'd make an excuse not to attend. I became a master of the strategic absence. My dad would sometimes comment that I didn't come around as much anymore, but he never connected it to Harold's presence. Or if he did, he never acknowledged it. Those 6 years were peaceful in their own way. I finished my medical degree. I met my fiance, now my husband, an amazing man who treats me with the respect and kindness I deserve. We built a life together. And when I got pregnant, I was over the moon. We were going to be parents, and I was determined to raise my child in an environment of love and support, so different from the dismissiveness I'd experienced from my own father. 6 months after my son was born, my dad's girlfriend was having a birthday party. I debated whether to go, but I genuinely liked her, and I thought it would be good for her to meet my baby. I asked my dad if Harold would be there, and he said no. So I decided to attend, bringing my fiancé and our infant son. Of course, Harold was there. I don't know if my dad lied or if Harold showed up uninvited, but there he was. And even though we hadn't seen each other in 6 years, even though I now had a baby and was clearly in a completely different phase of life, Harold immediately started talking to me as if I were still that dumb 18-year-old he'd met in college. My son spent most of the afternoon sleeping, which was a blessing. When he woke up hungry, I took him to a quiet room to breastfeed him. It was a peaceful moment, just me and my baby, away from the party noise and, more importantly, away from Harold. But when I came back to the party, I walked into the middle of Harold holding court, joking loudly about how I was probably a terrible mother. My blood ran cold. He was talking about me, about my parenting, to a room full of people without me even being present to defend myself. Then he turned his attention directly to me. He started interrogating me about my parenting choices, asking invasive questions about how I was raising my son, criticizing decisions I'd made right there in front of everyone. Each comment felt like a slap. Here was this man who'd belittled me for years, who knew nothing about my life or my child, publicly declaring that I was failing at motherhood. The room had gone quiet. People were uncomfortable, but no one was stepping in. They were all just watching this man eviscerate me while I was standing there holding my 6-month-old baby. And then Harold crossed a line I didn't even know existed. He looked at me, at my precious baby in my arms, and asked, "Have you thought about giving your baby up for adoption?" Something inside me broke. Or maybe it finally fully awakened. All those years of swallowing insults, of biting my tongue, of strategically avoiding this man to keep the peace, it all rushed to the surface in a tidal wave of rage. I snapped. I said loudly, my voice cutting through the party chatter, "If you know so much about parenting, Harold, then why does your ex-wife have full custody of your child?" The room went dead silent. Harold's face went pale, then red. But I wasn't done. Years of accumulated anger had been unleashed, and I was on a roll. I continued, "And what kind of man tries to sleep with his own brother's girlfriend?" I'd heard that story through the family grapevine. Harold had apparently made a move on his own brother's partner at some point, causing a massive family rift. And then, for the cherry on top, I looked him up and down and delivered the final blow. "Maybe you should lose some weight. With that gut, no wonder no woman wants to touch you with a 10-foot pole." The silence in the room was deafening. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, but I didn't care. I turned to my fiancé, who was standing there with his mouth slightly open in shock, and said, "We're leaving." I gathered my son's things, and we walked out. My fiancé followed, and I could hear the party erupt into whispered conversations behind us. As I reached the door, I made sure to slam it hard, enough that everyone would know exactly how I felt. On the drive home, my phone started blowing up with texts from my dad. "Come back right now. You need to apologize to Harold immediately. How dare you speak to my friend that way? Get back here now." I was still shaking with adrenaline, but I managed to text back, "There's no way that's happening. Did you even hear what Harold said to me?" My dad called immediately, and when I answered, he was yelling. He demanded to know why the hell I got so mad over Harold offering to make me a sandwich. I stopped breathing for a second. A sandwich? What? And then it hit me. My dad had been in the bathroom during the entire altercation. He'd missed everything Harold said to me. All he'd witnessed was me yelling, storming out, and slamming the door. So Harold, that manipulative piece of garbage, had apparently told my dad some sanitized version where he'd done nothing wrong and I'd overreacted to some innocent gesture. I started laughing. I couldn't help it. The absurdity of it was too much. Here was my dad defending his friend without even knowing what actually happened, just automatically assuming I was in the wrong. "Why are you laughing?" my dad demanded, confused and angry. "No reason," I said, still laughing. "Tell me why you're laughing."
he insisted. "Harold lied to you. I'm not going to tell you what actually happened, though. You need to call Harold and find out for yourself." Then I unleashed years of frustration. I told him that this was exactly the problem. He always blindly took Harold's side whenever his friend upset me. He never asked for my side of the story. He never defended me, never even considered that maybe Harold was the problem. I told him it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if he didn't even bother to call Harold, if he just took his friend's word and disregarded everything I was saying. He hung up on me.
That night, I didn't hear from anyone. I went to bed feeling drained, but also oddly liberated. My fiancé told me he was extremely proud of me, that my comments had been not only badass, but also funny as fuck. His support meant everything to me, especially since my own father had once again failed to provide it. The next day, I got a call from my dad. To my surprise, he'd actually called Harold to ask what really happened. When confronted, Harold apparently went quiet for a long minute before saying, "Oh." Harold then explained everything that had actually occurred to my father, who apparently listened without saying a word. According to what my dad told me later, Harold tried to twist the story, claiming he'd been genuinely concerned about me becoming a mom so young and didn't think I knew what I was doing. He apologized to my father. Not to me, mind you, but to my father for the misunderstanding. I didn't buy a word of it. Harold wasn't concerned about me. He'd been belittling me since I was 18 years old. This was just his latest attack, and he'd gotten caught. The day after that phone call, my dad called me. I expected an apology, maybe some acknowledgement that he should have defended me all those years. Instead, he told me that even after finding out the actual truth, I should forgive Harold for the honest misunderstanding. He also said I should apologize too, since I'd overreacted by telling Harold I hated him for such a small reason. I was stunned. Even with the truth laid out in front of him, my dad was still defending Harold and expecting me to be the one to make amends. I took a deep breath and explained to my father very clearly that I wasn't exaggerating when I said I hated Harold. The adoption comment wasn't the only reason. It was simply the culmination of years of condescending treatment. I listed every comment I could remember. The insults about my career aspirations, my clothing, my hobbies, the creepy comments about volleyball, the pushing me aside at the barbecue, and all the snide remarks at this latest party. My dad claimed he didn't remember any of it. And honestly, I believed him. My father doesn't pay attention to anything that doesn't directly concern or anger him, and he has the memory of a goldfish when it comes to things he finds unimportant. We also have completely different definitions of what's offensive, so comments that devastated me probably barely register for him. I made it crystal clear. I'd hated Harold for years before the party incident, and I had nothing to apologize for. Then I laid down my boundary. I would no longer attend any event where Harold was invited. You don't have to stop being friends with him. You don't even have to stop inviting him to things, but you can no longer expect me to show up as well. I'll ask you beforehand if he's going to be there, and if you lie to me, I'll leave immediately. My father called me dramatic, but I pointed out something he couldn't argue with. I'd been successfully avoiding Harold for 6 years, and no one had even noticed. It clearly hadn't been a problem for anyone. It hadn't ruined my father's life or disrupted family gatherings. I simply wasn't obligated to like his friends any more than he was obligated to like mine. There was some back and forth, but eventually he agreed to my terms. When we spot a few days later about something unrelated, my dad mentioned, casually, that Harold was upset about the situation. I ignored that comment completely. I wasn't going to feel guilty for finally standing up for myself. A lot of people asked me if I was planning to go no contact with my father over this. The answer is complicated.
Yes, I'm very aware that my dad is, to put it bluntly, an asshole. I came really close to cutting ties with him several times in recent years. But ultimately, I decided it wouldn't really fix anything. Maintaining a relationship with him has gotten much easier since I moved out and started my own life. We only see each other a couple of times a month now. He gets frustrated that I don't call or text more often, but he stopped complaining about it. I don't see the point in going no contact with someone who no longer has any real say in how I live my life. I'd rather just take note of what my father did wrong when I was growing up and make sure to raise my own son differently. That said, he's on thin ice and has been for some time. He's not allowed to babysit my son, mostly because I don't trust him to spend more than an hour alone with a baby before falling asleep on the couch. When I got pregnant, I started pushing him to go to therapy, and he finally started in June. His behavior around me and my younger sister, who still splits time between our very divorced parents, has improved significantly since he began therapy. I've made it clear to him that he won't be allowed near my son if he stops attending sessions. This is the first time in my life my father has actually improved his behavior in response to boundaries I've set. It's hard to be hopeful after a lifetime of disappointment, but I'm trying. And if I ever do go no contact with my father, it won't be because of Harold. It'll be because of my father's own actions or inaction.
A few months later, I'm happy to report that openly avoiding Harold has been working pretty well. My father has been respecting my boundaries, which honestly surprised me at first. Whenever he invites my husband and me over for lunch or dinner, I ask who else will be there. If Harold's coming, my dad tells me honestly, and he usually doesn't even insist or try to guilt me when I say I'm not attending. Since my last update, I'd only seen Harold once, at my dad's birthday party a few months ago. Yes, I knew he'd be there in advance. My father promised he'd tell Harold not to talk to me, and more importantly, some of my father's friends' kids would be there, kids I used to babysit and genuinely love. I hadn't seen them in a while, and I decided that I loved them more than I hated Harold, so the trade-off was worth it. I spent most of the party with my son and the kids, staying as far from Harold as possible. Harold didn't talk to me at all, so I guess my father kept his word. My husband and I did catch Harold staring at us a couple of times, which was unnerving, but I decided to ignore it. At one point, I caught my husband staring back, and somehow my sweet, gentle marshmallow of a husband managed to look genuinely threatening. I love this man with my whole heart. But someone did talk to me at that party. Harold's girlfriend. Yes, he has one now, and she's just as insufferable as he is. She interacted with me twice. First, she came over to coo over my son, which would have been fine before making a comment about how he needed a haircut. He was a baby with barely any hair. I already hated her. Later, she approached me and said, "You're shy, aren't you?" "No," I replied flatly. She laughed like I'd told a joke and said, "Yeah, you're shy," in the same condescending tone you talk to a 6-year-old. I managed to keep my expression neutral, but inside, I was seething. I wanted to tell her, "I'm not shy. I just chose to spend the whole party with the kids because they're better company than you and your annoying boyfriend." But I held my tongue. Barely. Based on both interactions, Harold's girlfriend is insufferable. In other words, they're perfect for each other. They deserve one another. In other family news, my dad broke up with the woman he was dating last year and has a new girlfriend. She's not annoying or psychotic, and I actually really like her. They probably won't last a year. That's just my dad's pattern, but I'm enjoying her presence while it lasts. My relationship with my dad is still not perfect, but it has improved. He's actually started apologizing to me more often, which is shocking. I don't know whether it's the therapy or the fact that motherhood has apparently made me more assertive. My husband says terrifying, but I prefer assertive. But I'll take it.
And I'll give credit where credit is due. My dad is a very good grandfather. He's patient and gentle with my son in ways he never was with me or my sister. It's bittersweet to watch, but mostly I'm just glad my son has that relationship with him. For several months after my dad started respecting my boundaries around Harold, things were genuinely good. I'd go to family dinners, bring my husband and son, and we'd have a pleasant time without any drama. I wasn't constantly on edge, wondering when Harold would show up or what he'd say. I honestly thought I was done dealing with him. Then came my dad's birthday. It was supposed to be a simple dinner, nothing too elaborate, just close family and a few friends. I made absolutely sure to ask my dad if Harold was going to be there, and he reassured me again that Harold wasn't invited. I felt relieved. My son was getting older and more aware of his surroundings, and the last thing I wanted was for him to witness any kind of confrontation. So we went. Everything seemed fine. My dad was in a good mood, his girlfriend was being sweet, and I was catching up with some family friends I hadn't seen in a while. It was shaping up to be a nice evening. Then, a few hours in, guess who walks through the door? Harold. And not just Harold, Harold drunk. I immediately shot my dad a look that could have melted steel. He looked just as surprised as I was, which told me he genuinely hadn't invited Harold. It turned out Harold had heard about the party through someone else and decided to show up unannounced. Because of course he did. Boundaries and social conventions don't apply to people like Harold. He was loud and obnoxious from the moment he arrived, acting like he was everyone's favorite person when most of the guests were clearly uncomfortable with his presence and his level of intoxication. I tried to stay as far from him as possible, keeping my focus on my son and talking with friends. I figured worst case scenario, we'd leave early if he got too unbearable. But as the night went on, Harold got worse. He started making snide comments to people, mostly directed at my dad, but also at other guests. And I could feel his eyes on me the whole time, that creepy awareness of being watched that makes your skin crawl. At one point, I overheard him drunkenly tell my dad, "You should have brought someone else's kid instead of hers. At least then you'd have a chance at decent grandkids." I froze. The insult wasn't just aimed at me this time. It was aimed at my innocent son, my baby who'd done nothing except exist. I wanted to scream at him, to physically throw him out of the party myself. But I stayed put, focusing on my son and husband. I thought if I ignored Harold long enough, he'd eventually shut up or leave. I was wrong. My dad was at the grill cooking burgers for everyone when Harold, in all his drunken wisdom, decided he needed to show everyone how grilling was really done. This was a callback to the barbecue incident from years ago, and the parallel wasn't lost on me. Harold stumbled over, beer in hand, and physically shoved my dad out of the way. That's when things got dangerous. Harold, trying to flip burgers while drunk, knocked the entire tray of food onto the ground. Raw meat, cooked burgers, everything just splattered across the patio. Everyone was staring. Some people gasped. A few of the kids started crying because the noise had startled them. And my dad? My dad tried to laugh it off. Like Harold was just being Harold. Like this was all some harmless drunken mishap and not a pattern of disrespectful, boundary-violating behavior that had been going on for years. That was my final straw. I couldn't stand it anymore. I stormed over to where Harold was standing, swaying slightly and looking pleased with himself despite the mess he had created. "Harold, you need to leave," I said loudly, "right now." He turned to face me, and this disgusting smirk spread across his face. "Oh, little Miss Know-It-All, you think you're all grown up now with your perfect little family?" "I'm done with you," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "You've been nothing but an arrogant, disgusting jerk for years. And if you think I'm going to let you treat me or my family like this anymore, you're delusional. Get the hell out of here." Harold stared at me, and for once he wasn't trying to defend himself or come up with a clever comeback. The smirk had fallen off his face. And then, miracle of miracles, my dad finally stepped in. "Harold," my dad said firmly, "you need to leave. Now." Harold looked genuinely shocked. He turned to my dad, probably expecting him to back down or soften the demand, maybe even laugh and say he was joking. But my dad didn't budge. "I'm serious," my dad continued. "You've crossed too many lines, and you're not welcome here anymore." Harold tried to laugh it off, asking if my dad was really serious about kicking him out over nothing. But my dad stood his ground. "Leave Harold. Now." Harold left, stumbling out the door with his tail between his legs, muttering something under his breath that no one could quite make out. The party was silent for a moment after he left, everyone processing what had just happened. Then my dad turned to me, and he apologized. A real, genuine apology. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have done that years ago. I was wrong to let him get away with treating you like that for so long." I could tell he meant it. This wasn't one of those non-apology apologies he'd given before. This was real accountability. For the first time in my entire life, my father had chosen me over Harold. He'd stood up for me when it mattered, and it wasn't just words this time. My dad hasn't spoken to Harold since that night. The friendship that had caused me so much pain, that had made me feel invisible and unimportant in my own father's eyes, was finally over. Not because I demanded it, but because my father finally saw Harold for what he really was and made the choice to end it himself.